I should have seen the signs, but I was too blinded by his charm and wealth. The night Marcus came home drunker than I'd ever seen, ranting about firing his sister Janie from the company, I knew something was very wrong. "That ungrateful bitch," Marcus slurred, slamming his fist on the marble countertop. "After everything I've done for her, she has the nerve to question my decisions?" I approached cautiously, the stench of whiskey heavy on his breath. "Marcus, what happened? Why do you want to fire Janie?" He sneered, his once handsome face contorted with rage. "She thinks she knows better than me, trying to tell me how to run my own damn company." I tried to reason with him. "But Janie's been a huge asset. The investors love her, and she's helped the company grow." "I don't care," Marcus roared, his bloodshot eyes wild. "It's my company, my rules. She's out, and that's final." I shrank back, startled by the venom in his voice. This wasn't the man I married. The Marcus I fell in love with was charming, ambitious, a visionary who took his father's small construction firm and turned it into an empire. But over the past year, as his drinking escalated, a darker side emerged. "Maybe sleep on it," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. "Firing your sister is a big decision. You're not thinking clearly right now." "Oh, I'm thinking clearly all right," Marcus growled. "More clearly than I have in years. Janie's a threat, and I need to take her out before she takes me down." With that, he stormed off, leaving me stunned in the kitchen. I gripped the counter, my mind reeling. I knew Janie was more than capable. She'd been the VP for 5 years, and the staff adored her. What was Marcus so threatened by? I thought back to when I first met the siblings at a charity gala. Janie was the one who introduced me to Marcus, singing his praises as an eligible bachelor. She'd been our biggest supporter when we got married 2 years later in a lavish ceremony covered by all the local papers. The golden couple, they called us. But now, as I watched Marcus's tall form disappear into his study, slamming the door behind him, a chill ran through me. The man I loved was changing before my eyes, becoming someone I no longer recognized. And I had a sinking feeling that his vendetta against Janie was only the beginning of something much darker. Little did I know then how bad things were about to get. That night was just the first sign of the storm that was coming. A storm that would rip apart everything I thought I knew and everyone I held dear. My only solace is that I had no idea, as I stood alone in our sleek, cold kitchen, how much worse it would become before the end. The next morning, I found Marcus hunched over his desk, head in his hands. The room reeked of stale alcohol and regret. I approached tentatively, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, about last night," I began, but he cut me off. "I meant what I said, Gabrielle." His voice was hoarse but determined. "Janie's become a liability. She's questioning my every move, undermining me in front of the investors." I frowned, taken aback by his paranoia. "She's just trying to help, Marcus. The company is as much her legacy as it is yours." He slammed his fist on the desk, making me jump. "It's my name on the building, not hers. I'm the one who turned this business into an empire while she rode on my coattails." "That's not fair," I argued, my frustration rising. "Janie's been by your side every step of the way. You two used to be a team." Marcus scoffed, his eyes cold. "Well, there's no room for 2 captains on this ship. It's time I showed her who's really in charge." I shook my head, exasperated by his stubbornness. "And how do you plan to do that? Fire her in front of everyone? Think about how that will look to the staff, the investors." He leaned back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Oh, I've thought about it. In fact, I've got the perfect opportunity coming up." My stomach churned as he outlined his plan. The company's annual charity gala was just a week away, a glitzy affair attended by all the bigwigs in town. Marcus wanted to use the event to publicly humiliate Janie, stripping her of her title and escort her out in front of everyone. "Marcus, please," I pleaded, horrified by his callousness. "Don't do this. Janie doesn't deserve to be treated like that." He stood abruptly, towering over me with a sneer. "I don't pay you to give me advice, Gabrielle. I pay you to stand by my side and look pretty." His words cut deep, revealing the ugly truth I'd been trying to ignore. In Marcus's eyes, I was nothing more than a trophy wife, an accessory to boost his ego. I swallowed back my tears, trying to hold on to my composure. "I'm your wife, Marcus. I'm supposed to be your partner, your equal." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Equal? Don't make me laugh. You'd be nothing without me, Gabrielle. Just another pretty face in a sea of gold diggers." I recoiled as if he'd slapped me, my heart shattering into a million pieces. I'd given up everything for this man, my career, my dreams, my identity, and now he was treating me like I was disposable. But even as the pain threatened to consume me, a small spark of defiance ignited in my chest. I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze head-on. "You're wrong, Marcus. I'm not nothing, and I won't stand by and watch you destroy everything we've built." His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching with barely contained rage. "Be careful, Gabrielle. You don't want to end up on my bad side." With that, he brushed past me, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of his study. I sank into his leather chair, my head spinning with the weight of what had just transpired. I knew I couldn't let Marcus go through with his plan to destroy Janie, but I also knew that going against him would come at a steep price. He held all the power, all the cards, and I was just a pawn in his twisted game. But as I sat there, staring at the remnants of our shattered marriage, I made a vow to myself. I would find a way to stop Marcus, to make him pay for his cruelty, even if it meant losing everything in the process. The night of the charity gala arrived, and I found myself standing in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. My face was perfectly made up, my hair swept into an elegant updo, but my eyes were hollow, haunted by the knowledge of what was to come. I smoothed down the front of my designer gown, a shimmering creation of silk and lace that Marcus had insisted I wear. "You need to look the part," he'd said, his tone brooking no argument. "I won't have my wife embarrassing me in front of the who's who of the city." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the performance of a lifetime. I had to play the role of the dutiful spouse, the picture-perfect accessory to Marcus's success. Even as my heart screamed in protest, I pasted on a smile and made my way downstairs. The ballroom was a sea of glittering jewels and expensive suits, the air thick with the scent of money and power. I spotted Janie across the room, radiant in a deep blue gown, her head thrown back in laughter as she chatted with a group of investors. My heart clenched at the sight of her, so unaware of the humiliation that awaited her. Marcus appeared at my elbow, his grip on my arm just a little too tight. "Showtime," he murmured, his breath hot against my ear. "Let's give them a night they'll never forget." He led me through the crowd, his charm turned up to full wattage as he greeted clients and colleagues alike. I played my part, smiling and nodding at all the right moments, even as my stomach churned with dread. As the evening wore on, Marcus took to the stage, tapping his glass to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as honey, "I want to thank you all for coming out tonight to support such a worthy cause." The crowd applauded politely, and Marcus basked in the attention, his ego swelling with every clap. But before we get to the main event, I have a little announcement to make. My heart stopped as he turned his gaze to Janie, his eyes glittering with malice. "Janie, darling, would you come up here for a moment?" Janie looked confused but made her way to the stage, her smile faltering as she took in Marcus's expression. "What's going on, Marcus?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, nothing much," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "Just a little restructuring of the company. You see, dear sister, I've decided that your services are no longer required." The room fell silent, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Janie's face drained of color, her eyes wide with shock. "What? What are you talking about?" Marcus smirked, relishing her confusion. "I'm firing you, Janie, effective immediately. You're no longer the VP of my company." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a buzz of whispers. Janie stared at Marcus, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You can't do this," she managed, her voice shaking. "I've given everything to this company, to our family, and I've given you plenty in return," Marcus sneered. "But it's time for a change. I need someone I can trust by my side, not a backstabbing snake like you." Janie reeled back as if he'd struck her, tears welling in her eyes. "Marcus, please," she begged. "Don't do this. Not here. Not like this." But Marcus was already motioning to security, his face a mask of cold indifference. "Escort her out," he ordered, "and make sure she doesn't take anything that doesn't belong to her." I watched in horror as two burly guards grabbed Janie by the arms, dragging her off the stage as she kicked and screamed. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mix of shock and morbid fascination. As Janie was hauled past me, our eyes met for a brief moment. In that instant, I saw the betrayal, the rage, the utter devastation in her gaze. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was only the beginning of Marcus's reign of terror. The fallout from Janie's public firing was immediate and intense. Investors pulled out left and right, The company's stock plummeted, and the media had a field day dragging Marcus's name through the mud. But he remained unrepentant, his arrogance only growing in the face of adversity. I tried to talk sense into him, to make him see the damage he was causing, but he brushed me off like a pesky fly. "They'll come crawling back," he sneered. "They always do. I'm Marcus fucking Thompson, and this is my empire." But even as he puffed out his chest, I could see the cracks starting to form. Late at night, I'd find him hunched over his desk, a glass of whiskey in hand, muttering to himself about traitors and backstabbers. He was unraveling, and I was helpless to stop it. It was Janie who finally threw me a lifeline. She showed up at our door one evening, her eyes red-rimmed but her jaw set with determination. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the foyer. I led her into the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. "Janie, I'm so sorry," I began, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Save it, Gabrielle. I know you're not to blame for my brother's actions, but I also know that you're the only one who can stop him." She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers, her hand trembling slightly as she handed them to me. "I've been doing some digging," she said, her voice low and urgent, "and what I found is worse than I ever imagined." As I flipped through the documents, my eyes widened in horror. Bank statements, receipts, email exchanges, all pointing to a massive embezzlement scheme orchestrated by none other than Marcus himself. He'd been siphoning company funds for years, funneling the money into offshore accounts and using it to finance his lavish lifestyle and numerous affairs. "Oh my God," I whispered, my stomach churning with nausea. "How did he think he could get away with this?" Janie laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "He's always thought he was untouchable, that the rules didn't apply to him, but this time he's gone too far." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine. "Gabrielle, we have to stop him. If we don't, he'll run this company into the ground and take us all down with him." I swallowed hard, my mind reeling with the implications of what she was suggesting. "What do you want me to do?" Janie's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "I need you to be my eyes and ears inside the company. Help me gather more evidence, rally the investors to our side. We have to build a case against him, one so airtight that even he can't wriggle out of it." I hesitated, torn between my loyalty to my husband and my disgust at his actions. But as I looked at Janie, saw the desperation and determination in her eyes, I knew I couldn't turn my back on her. Not again. "I'll do it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll help you take him down." Janie nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Gabrielle. I know this can't be easy for you, but trust me, it's the right thing to do." As she stood to leave, she paused, her hand on the doorknob. "One more thing," she said, her tone turning ominous. "Be careful. If Marcus finds out what we're doing, there's no telling what he'll do." I nodded, a chill running down my spine at the thought of Marcus's wrath. But as I watched Janie disappear into the night, I felt a flicker of hope ignite in my chest. For the first time in months, I had a purpose, a reason to fight, and I would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. Over the next few weeks, I became a double agent in my own home. By day, I played the role of the dutiful wife, attending charity luncheons and smiling for the cameras. But by night, I pored over financial records and email trails gathering evidence of Marcus's misdeeds. It wasn't easy, living a lie. Every time Marcus touched me, every time he whispered sweet nothings in my ear, I had to fight back the urge to recoil in disgust. But I knew I had to keep up the charade, for Janie's sake, and for my own. As the evidence mounted, so did my resolve. I couldn't believe the depth of Marcus's betrayal, the sheer audacity of his crimes. He'd been stealing from his own company, his own family, for years, all to fund his depraved lifestyle. But what sickened me most was the discovery of his mistress. Her name was Alicia, and she was a young, beautiful model with a penchant for designer handbags and exotic vacations. Marcus had been showering her with gifts and attention, all while neglecting his own wife and business. I confronted him one night, after a particularly grueling day of playing the perfect spouse. He was in his study, as usual, a glass of scotch in hand and a smirk on his face. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. He raised an eyebrow, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, and what about, my dear?" I threw the stack of papers on his desk, watching as his smirk faltered. "About this. About your embezzlement, your affairs, your lies." For a moment he looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But then his face hardened, his eyes turning cold and calculating. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But I suggest you drop this nonsense before you get yourself into trouble. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the room. Trouble? You're the one in trouble, Marcus. I have proof of everything, and I'm not afraid to use it. He stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. You wouldn't dare. You're nothing without me, Gabrielle. Just a pretty face with an empty head. I smiled, a slow, cruel smile that I hardly recognized as my own. That's where you're wrong, Marcus. I'm not nothing. I'm the woman who's going to destroy you. He lunged at me then, his hands wrapping around my throat. I gasped for air, my vision blurring as he squeezed tighter and tighter. But even as I struggled against his grip, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. With my free hand, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, hitting the record button. Go ahead, I choked out, my voice raspy and strained. Kill me. But know that everything you say and do from this moment on will be used against you in a court of law. His eyes widened, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I stumbled back, rubbing my bruised neck as I held up my phone. You're finished, Marcus, I said, my voice shaking with adrenaline. I have all the evidence I need to send you to prison for a very long time. He stared at me, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. You fucking bitch, he snarled. You'll pay for this. I'll make sure of it. But I just smiled, a triumphant, defiant smile that lit up my whole face. No, Marcus, you're the one who's going to pay, and I'm going to enjoy every second of watching you fall. With that, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, my head held high and my heart pounding with exhilaration. For the first time in years, I felt alive, empowered, free, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I would never let anyone take that feeling away from me again. The day of the board meeting dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I dressed carefully, choosing a sleek black suit that radiated power and confidence. I was ready for battle, armed with the truth and a determination to see justice served. Janie met me outside the boardroom, her face a mask of grim resolve. Are you ready for this? She asked, her voice low and urgent. I nodded, my jaw set with determination. Let's do this. We entered the room together, a united front against the man who had wronged us both. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his face a picture of arrogance and entitlement. He smirked as we took our seats, his eyes glinting with malice. Well, 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 he drawled. If it isn't my two favorite ladies, to what do I owe the pleasure? Janie stood up, her voice ringing out clear and strong. We're here to present evidence of your illegal activities, Marcus. Embezzlement, fraud, abuse of power. We have proof of it all. The room erupted into chaos, voices rising in shock and disbelief. But Marcus just laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent shivers down my spine. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he sneered. I own this company, this city. I can destroy you both with a snap of my fingers. But Janie wasn't backing down. She pulled out the stack of documents, slamming them down on the table. These are bank statements, email exchanges, recorded conversations, all pointing to your guilt, Marcus. You're finished. Marcus's face turned purple with rage, his fists clenching at his sides. You fucking bitch, he snarled. You think you can take me down? I'll bury you, just like I buried our father. The room fell silent, a collective gasp of horror echoing off the walls. I felt my stomach lurch, bile rising in my throat. What had he done? Janie's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes wide with shock. What did you say? Marcus grinned, a sickening, twisted smile that made my skin crawl. Dear old Dad was going to cut me out of the company, leave everything to you. I couldn't let that happen. So I made sure he had a little accident on the construction site. A tragic fall, they called it. But we both know the truth, don't we, sis? I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The man I had married, the man I had loved, was a monster. A cold-blooded killer who had murdered his own father for power and greed. Janie was shaking, tears streaming down her face. But her voice was steady as she turned to the board members, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. You see, this is the man you've been following, the man you've been entrusting with your investments and your livelihoods, a liar, a thief, a murderer. The room exploded into motion, voices shouting over each other in a cacophony of anger and disgust. Security guards burst through the doors, grabbing Marcus by the arms and hauling him out of his seat. You can't do this to me, he screamed, his face contorted with rage. I am Marcus fucking Thompson. I am a god. But no one was listening. The board members were on their feet, their faces a mix of shock and revulsion. They had seen the truth, seen the monster behind the mask. and they wanted no part of it. As Marcus was dragged away, kicking and screaming like a feral animal, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over me. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. Janie collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with sobs. I held her tight, my own tears mingling with hers. We had won. We had taken down the man who had destroyed our lives, our family, and we had done it together. But even as I savored the sweet taste of victory, I knew that the road ahead would be long and hard. We had to rebuild, to heal, to find a way to move forward in a world without Marcus Thompson. But we would do it. We were survivors, Janie and I. And nothing, not even the darkest of demons, could keep us down for long. The aftermath of Marcus's downfall was a whirlwind of chaos and confusion. The media descended on the company like vultures, picking apart every sordid detail of his crimes. Investors pulled out in droves, the stock price plummeting to an all-time low. But amidst the turmoil, Janie emerged as a beacon of hope. She stepped up to the plate, taking over as interim CEO and working tirelessly to salvage what was left of the company. And to my surprise, she asked me to be by her side to help her navigate the treacherous waters ahead. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye," she said, her voice soft and sincere. "But I've seen the strength in you, Gabrielle, the courage and the resilience. I need someone like you on my team, someone I can trust." I was taken aback by her offer, unsure of how to respond. But as I looked into her eyes, saw the genuine warmth and respect there, I knew that I couldn't refuse. "I'm in," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "Let's do this together." And so we did. We worked day and night, poring over financial reports and legal documents, meeting with investors and stakeholders to reassure them of our commitment to the company's future. It was grueling, thankless work, but we persevered, driven by a shared sense of purpose and determination. As the weeks turned into months, I watched Janie blossom into a true leader. She was tough but fair, decisive but compassionate. She had a way of inspiring people, of bringing out the best in them even in the darkest of times. And slowly but surely, the company began to recover. New investors came on board, drawn by Janie's vision and integrity. The stock price stabilized, then started to climb. We were turning a corner, building something new and better from the ashes of Marcus's reign. But even as we celebrated our successes, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. Marcus may have been gone, but his shadow still loomed large over everything we did. And then one day I received a letter. It was from Marcus, written from the prison where he was serving a life sentence for his crimes. I almost didn't open it, almost threw it away unopened, but something compelled me to read it, to see what he had to say. "My dearest Gabrielle," it began, the words dripping with false sincerity. "I hope this letter finds you well. I know we didn't part on the best of terms, but I want you to know that I forgive you. I understand why you did what you did, and I hold no grudges." I felt my blood boil as I read on, his words a twisted mix of manipulation and delusion. He talked about his plans for the future, about how he would be released on a technicality and take back what was rightfully his. He even had the audacity to suggest that we could be together again, that he could make me happy in ways that no one else could. I crumpled the letter in my fist, my heart pounding with rage and disgust. How dare he? How dare he try to worm his way back into my life, into my head? I had spent too long under his spell, too long believing his lies and excuses. I was done with him, done with the pain and the darkness he brought into my world. I marched into Janie's office, the letter clutched in my hand. She looked up at me, her brow furrowed with concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle and probing. I handed her the letter, watching as her face darkened with each line she read. When she finished, she looked up at me, her eyes blazing with anger and determination. "He's never getting out," she said, her voice low and fierce. "We'll make sure of it. He'll rot in that cell for the rest of his miserable life, and he'll never hurt anyone again." I nodded, my own resolve hardening like steel. We had come too far, fought too hard to let Marcus win. He may have been a monster, but we were the ones who had slain him, and we would keep slaying him, every day for the rest of our lives. 10 years later, I stood at the window of my corner office, looking out over the city skyline. The view never failed to take my breath away, a testament to how far I had come since those dark days of betrayal and despair. Janie had kept her word, making me her right-hand woman as we rebuilt the company from the ground up. It hadn't been easy, but we had persevered, driven by a shared sense of purpose and a deep, unshakable bond. Now, as I surveyed the bustling streets below, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. We had done it. We had taken a broken, corrupted empire and transformed it into something beautiful, something good. A knock at the door startled me out of my reverie. I turned to see Janie standing there, a small, sad smile on her face. "Hey," she said softly. "You got a minute?" I nodded, gesturing for her to come in. She settled into the chair across from my desk, her eyes downcast and troubled. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart clenching with concern. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's Marcus. He's dead." I felt a jolt of shock run through me, followed by a strange, hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. "What happened?" "Overdose," Janie said, her voice flat and emotionless. "They found him in his cell this morning. Apparently, he'd been hoarding his meds, saving them up for one last hurrah." I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling with the news. Marcus was gone. The man who had haunted my dreams, who had cast such a long, dark shadow over my life, was finally, irrevocably gone. "I don't know how to feel," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Part of me is relieved, but another part—" "I know," Janie said, reaching across the desk to take my hand. "He was a monster, but he was still my brother, still the man you married." We sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in our own thoughts and memories. Finally, Janie spoke again, her voice soft but determined. "I want you to come with me," she said, "to the funeral." I looked up at her, my eyes wide with surprise. "Are you sure? After everything he did?" She nodded, her jaw set with resolve. "We need closure, Gabrielle. We need to say goodbye, once and for all." And so a week later, we found ourselves standing at the edge of a windswept cemetery, watching as Marcus's casket was lowered into the ground. There were no mourners, no tearful eulogies, just the two of us, the only ones who had ever truly known the man behind the monster. As the last shovelful of dirt was thrown onto the grave, Janie turned to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's over," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He can't hurt us anymore." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even known I was carrying. "We're free." We walked out of the cemetery together, our heads held high and our hearts lighter than they had been in years. We had survived, Janie and I. We had taken the worst that life had thrown at us and come out the other side, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And as we drove back to the city, back to the life we had built together, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and possibility. The future was ours, and we would face it together, come what may. In the end, Marcus had been his own worst enemy. His greed, his cruelty, his arrogance, they had all come back to haunt him, to destroy him in the end. But Janie and I, we had something he could never take away from us. We had each other, and we had the strength and the courage to keep going no matter what. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all.